I wanted to ask you about the recent US attack on Iranian cities, particularly in the south, but we have also read about the international railway corridor connecting Tehran through Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan into China. And I guess that was also used with Russia as well. What is your sense of why the U.S. Renewed its attack?
Well, the United States never really intended to implement the MOU. And the Iranians, though, they agreed with this MOU because they wanted to export oil and bring in supplies. They thought that they could get ahead of the game because they had a lot of tankers that were stuck in port and a lot of ships that couldn't come to Iranian ports. And they believed that if they were able to export and import and earn well through it, their oil exports for a bit, they could better prepare themselves for a long conflict. And so when the MOU was signed, we saw that almost immediately Iran sent roughly 40 million barrels of oil to its Asian customers within just a few days. And that's because those tankers were already full, but stuck due to the US siege. The Iranians were willing to fully implement the deal, the agreement, or the memorandum of understanding, but they knew the Americans weren't sincere. The Americans only accepted because they were in a bad situation. And so since the MOU was signed, the Americans have been dragging their feet. They have not forced the Israeli regime to leave Lebanon and to end the war, as the MOU says they must. Yesterday, 2 Lebanese citizens were murdered. The day before, at least 3, maybe more yesterday. I know of 2. The day before yesterday, a school principal, she was murdered along with her husband and their maid, and maybe others. And today, I don't know. But the regime is constantly killing innocent people and occupying the country. So that's a violation. The United States has not handed over stolen Iranian assets. They've reversed the waiver on Iranian oil sales. And most importantly, they tried to create a corridor in the Strait of Hormuz. And in Article 5, according to the MOU, Iran is supposed to open the Strait of Hormuz to where it was before the U.S. imposed war, the U.S.-Israeli imposed war. The Iranians are supposed to normalize trade within a couple of months. Within a month, and then the second month, trade would be back to normal. So the United States tried to create an alternative corridor in the Strait and force ships to take that corridor. The Iranians for days protested and warned ships. The U.S. ignored Iran. Many of those ships ignored Iran too, perhaps under duress. And then finally, Iran struck at least 3, I'm not quite sure of the number actually, but 3 or 4, maybe 5 ships, I know of 3 for certain. And the United States attacked Iran, which is itself a violation of the deal. And another violation is the United States president constantly threatens Iran with attacks. And in the MOU, it says that the United States must not threaten. Neither side should threaten the other side during the period of the MOU. So the Americans have been violating the deal across the board. And here in the Iranians, they know that their leverage is the Strait of Hormuz. So when the Americans, they cooperate less, when they implement the deal less, the Iranians cooperate less. When the Americans cooperate more, the Iranians cooperate more. This is basically how it's been. But I think that in general, the United States can't make the right decision to end the conflict because the Zionist lobby and the Israeli regime won't have it. And so while the global energy crisis has not gone away and the shortages persist, Trump is taking a big risk. If there is escalation, and there already is a lot of escalation, but if it goes much longer and further, then that could very swiftly lead to an energy crisis, because we're already almost there. You recall that when Trump signed the MOU, his justification for it was that we're 4 weeks away to running out of energy supplies. So those shortages have not been dealt with. Those shortages still exist. They persist. They haven't been resolved, and therefore, Iran knows this, and therefore the United States is in a lot of trouble.
It seems to me, reading news about this, at least two different corridors that Iran and the United States are contesting at the Strait of Hormuz. It seems to me that along with the traditional set of conflicts, the Iranian nuclear program, Iran's support of the resistance in the region, it seems to me this third element has become a critical component of the conflict, which is of relatively recent origin. A lot of people might not be familiar with sort of what is at stake with two different corridors. Iran says that according to the MOU, it will not permit the establishment of any new corridor outside the framework of its own arrangement. The US, of course, wants to control and establish its own corridor. So if you could tell us a little bit more about what is going on the Strait of Hormuz and what are the differences between Iran and the United States.
Well, what I explained was in response to your first question when you spoke about the railway links and their attack on the railway, which linked Iran to Central Asia, China, and to Russia. And what I was trying to say is that the conflict with Iran has nothing to do with the nuclear program. The nuclear program was always an excuse. They knew that Iran was not developing a nuclear weapon. It wasn't developing a nuclear weapon 10 years ago. It wasn't developing a nuclear weapon 20 years ago. And it certainly wasn't developing a nuclear weapon last month or last year. The nuclear weapon scam, and there's a good book on this by Gareth Porter called Manufactured Crisis, and another very small book, but very good, called A Dangerous Delusion by Peter Oborn, that discusses the nuclear program. This whole manufactured crisis was in order to put pressure on Iran, to weaken Iran. And so when they bomb Iran, that's to weaken the country. When they bomb Iran's railway links to other countries, they want to weaken Iran economically. And when the United States is trying to take control of the Strait of Hormuz, they want to strangle Iran economically too. So this has nothing to do with the nuclear program. Yeah, last year when the Americans bombed Iran's peaceful nuclear installations, Trump constantly said that we've obliterated them. If they're obliterated, then there should be no reason for further attacks. But we saw a much bigger war take place, which is ongoing. So that is about Iran. The United States, because of the Zionist lobby and the Israeli regime, do not want Iran to exist. And so what the Americans are trying to do is that they're trying to first of all, undermine the MOU at in multiple ways, as I've already explained. But what has led to this conflict is that when the war started, when the United States and the Israelis began attacking Iran, bombing schools and hospitals and murdering Ayatollah Khamenei and others, the Iranians immediately started hitting back, and at the same time, they took control of the strait. Why? Because the 5 countries that were collaborating with the United States, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar, were using the strait. So Iran took control. Did Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz? No. Even now, the Iranians have not shut it down. You can go through the Iranian corridor. But they shut it down for those countries and Iran's enemies, and thus causing the United States enormous trouble. The Americans tried desperately to weaken Iran's hold. They failed. Then they went to siege warfare, and they again failed. Then at the negotiating table again, they failed. So now what they're trying to do is they're trying to undermine the peace MOU. In the MOU, it is said that Iran will facilitate the normalization of trade in the Strait of Hormuz within the first month. And then in the second month of the MOU, trade will be normal, like it was months ago. And Iran and Oman will discuss how to control the strait. There's not a word about the United States. The United States plays no role. The United States was unable to have a role during the war. It was unable to undermine Iran. So what the Americans did is that they used this peace and the normalization of trade to subtly, very subtly open up a strait themselves, open up a corridor. And then they would tell ships, do not use the Iranian promoted corridor, the Iranian supported corridor, the corridor that was declared by the Iranian Navy. Go through the corridor that we have created. And many ships, of course, did, under duress or for whatever reason, they did so. Or they belonged to these regimes that are bound to the United States, so they did so. And for days, the Iranians kept protesting. And then ultimately, they kept warning ships, and they wouldn't listen. Ultimately, the Iranians had to hit those ships. Because if the Americans got their way and controlled the Strait of Hormuz, that would undermine Iran's control and Iran's leverage, and then the Americans would not abide by any of their commitments. And then, have no doubt, the Americans would go on to another war against Iran. But this time, having failed to gain a foothold through war, they would use peace, a time of peace, to undermine Iran. So Iran will not accept that, and that's why we have two days and nights of fighting between Iran and the United States, and of course, all of those Arab regimes, as we speak, they're collaborating with the Americans. Qatar is helping the U.S. Air Force. The Saudis are also doing the same. Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, all of them are involved. Every single one of them. And of course, Jordan. So the Iranians do not want war, and they want the normalization of trade because it's our region and it serves our interests as well. But the Iranians are not going to allow the Americans to undermine them.